I'm quite sure what's wrong with me. You don't do that. You go to an expert and you take his opinion on this matter, and you don't really even ask for evidences. Whatever he prescribes, you say, I think that would be good for me because I put my trust in the doctor. Same with your car. When something goes bang in your car, you don't get them, unless it's very simple, you don't fix it yourself, you take it to the mechanic. So in everyday life, we do this. We take the opinion of experts in that field. So same with the Sharia. We won't, and we shouldn't, and we mustn't aim to do it ourselves. This is why we hand over this matter to the mujtahid scholars, who are experts in Islamic law. So it's very unfortunate that in our time, Islamic law is the most delicate of these subjects. And it's unfortunate in our times people think that they can do this themselves. So this is why we're talking about Imam Abu Hanifa radiallahu ta'ala, because he is our Imam and we are muqallid of Imam Abu Hanifa. So when we make taqleed of somebody, you are his muqallid, he is your Imam. Okay? Like you have a prayer Imam, you are the muqtadi. So when we make taqleed, meaning we follow someone's legal opinion without asking for evidences, we are making taqleed, we are his muqallid. So Imam Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu, we'll mention some facts about him. So we won't concentrate too much on the fiqh side of it, more on his life. So his name is Nu'man ibn Thabit radiallahu anhu. His name is Nu'man, he is the son of Thabit, and he is known as Al-Imam Abu Hanifa. And the year he passed away, it says it's 150. We'll talk about the year of birth shortly. And people like Imam Abu Dawood, the hadith master Imam Abu Dawood, have called him the Imam. So even masters like Imam Abu Dawood say he is the Imam. And Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, there have been scores, maybe hundreds of commentaries written to Sahih Bukhari. Without doubt, the most authentic or the most relied upon commentary of Sahih Bukhari is Imam Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani's Fathul Bari. That same Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, he describes Imam Abu Hanifa with these words. He says, he is the Imam, one of those who have reached the sky. Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani is saying this about Imam Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu. He is the Imam, and he is one whose knowledge has reached the sky. And in the Islamic world, he is known as the greatest Imam. So we say he is Imam Abu Hanifa, he is Nu'man ibn Thabit, he is Al-Imam al-A'zam, the greatest Imam. And this is not a terminology concocted by the Hanafis. This is something, the very earlier Muslims referred to him as Al-Imam al-A'zam, the greatest Imam. And his school, in fact, has the largest number of followers amongst the 4 schools of Ahlul Sunnah. There are 4 Sunni schools when we talk about fiqh, when we talk about Islamic law. There are 4 schools. The Hanafi school, which comes from Imam Abu Hanifa, and then Imam Shafi'i school is the Shafi'i school, Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal has the Hanbali school, and Imam Malik has the Maliki school. 4 Sunni schools, and Ahlul Sunnah is confined in these 4. 4, no more. Okay? So his muqaddids are the most amongst Ahlul Sunnah. Perhaps 70% of the Sunni world is Hanafi. The whole of the subcontinent is Hanafi. So we have the whole of India, which officially they say is what, less than 20% Muslims. But unofficial figures we know it's much more. And if you take the populations of India and Pakistan and Bangladesh, you reach 500 million already, Muslims. And then you have Afghanistan, and then you have Eastern Europeans are Hanafi as well. And then you go to the other side of China, they are all Hanafis. Not the Iraq. So when you add up the subtotal, around 70% of the Muslim world is Hanafi. So his school is by far the largest. And he is the first of the 4 Mujtahid Imams, the first in birth. And amongst the 4 Mujtahid Imams, he is the only Tabi'i. The other 3 weren't from the Tabi'i. A Tabi'i is someone who met the Sahaba, who saw the Sahaba. And it's unanimously agreed that Imam Abu Hanifa, he met the Sahaba. Imam Abu Hanifa, he saw a Jilla Sahaba, leading Sahaba like Anas ibn Malik, radiallahu anhu, Abdullah ibn Abi Awfa, and Sahal ibn Sa'ad, and Abu Tufail Amir bin Wathila. Some narrations say he meant 9, some say 17, some say even more. Imam Abu Hanifa, by consensus, is a tabi'i, someone who gained the company of the Sahaba. And the other 3 mujtahid imams didn't. So he's the only one who is a tabi'i amongst the mujtahideen mutlaq a'imma. And his legacy is that Imam Abu Hanifa anhu, was the first in Islam to organize the writing of fiqh under subheadings. Before him, this didn't happen. So, in chapters, to take the rulings of the Sharia and divide them into chapters. Now we take this for granted, that you have a book of fiqh, and you have a chapter of aqidah, then tahara, then salah, then zakah. Okay, you will have all of these things. But Imam Abu Hanifa radiallahu ta'ala anhu is the first to do this, to actually write the rulings of fiqh under subheadings. And it embraced the whole of the Islamic law. Every subject, every topic of Islamic law is covered by Imam Abu Hanifa and his students in the Hanafi school. And it's the most developed school of the 4. So he begins with purity, then the salah. And this order actually was retained by all of the scholars after him. Starting with tahara, then salah, and then so on. Such as Imam Malik, Imam Shafi'i. So they followed him in this. Imam Abu Dawood, even Imam Bukhari, Imam Muslim, Tirmidhi, and all of this. They followed him in this to then take rulings, put them into subject matters in this order. So all of these are actually indebted to Imam Abu Hanifa. And in fact, they are giving him a share of their reward, because the Prophet ﷺ said, and this hadith is in Sahih Muslim in Kitab al-Ilm, that man sanna fil Islam sunnatan hasanatan falahu ajruha wa ajru man amila biha. Which means he who starts something good in Islam, he who initiates or innovates something good in Islam, he has its reward. Falahu ajruha. He will get the reward, obviously, because he was the first person to do this good action, but also وَأَجْرُ مَنْ عَمِلَ بِهَا. Everyone who follows him subsequently will get the reward, and he will get the sum total of the reward of all those people, without his reward being reduced in the first place, till the Day of Judgment. And the same says whoever innovates something bad, and then he will get the sin and the sin of all those people who followed him in that. So Imam Abu Hanifa was the first to open this road of categorizing the subjects of fiqh. And Imam Shafi'i said something huge when he said that An-Nas, all of the people, he said An-Nas, all of the people are the children of Abu Hanifa in fiqh. Or everyone. That's not just you and I, but even the fuqaha, the jurists that came after him, they are like the children of Abu Hanifa in fiqh. And in history, they are the children of Ibn Ishaq and Imam Malik in hadith. So Imam Shafi'i is saying this about Imam Abu Hanifa. So someone that great is saying that about Imam Abu Hanifa must mean something huge. Must mean he was at a level of learning which we can only imagine. And Al-Khatib, he narrates that Imam Abu Hanifa's student Abu Nu'aym, he said about his teacher that Muslims, they should make dua to Allah on behalf of Abu Hanifa in their prayers. In every dua, we should make dua for our Imam Abu Hanifa radiallahu ta'ala. Why? Because the sunnah and fiqh were preserved through him. He preserved fiqh for us. See, we don't have to do anything now. Imagine how difficult this is, going back to Tabligh, how, not difficult, impossible. It's absolutely impossible. No chance of it happening and it's not practical, and if we were to set out to do that, that's all we do all our lives. We don't have time to do anything else. Just imagine you first learn the Arabic language, and all of the associated sciences, and tafsir, and nasikh, and mansukh, and hadith, and its usul, and fiqh, and its usul. And that's just to start off. So if everyone was to do that, he would have no time for family, and friends, and for work, and for worship even. Because that's all you'd be doing. You need someone of that intelligence to do these things. So that's why we make dua for Imam Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu in every dua that we make, because he preserved the sunnah and fiqh and Islam for us. He did all of the hard work for us, and all we have to do is now open a book, that's the ruling, we don't need to know the proofs. Because we have someone as scrupulous, as intelligent, and as pious as Imam Abu Hanifa, who did the work for us. Imam al-Zahabi, he wrote 1 volume each for the other 3 Imams, about their lives. But when he came to Imam Abu Hanifa, he said the account of Abu Hanifa would actually require 2 volumes. So the other scholars always single him out as the greatest amongst the 4. And his son Hammad, when he was washing his father's body, he also said something amazing. He said that, may Allah have mercy on you, you have exhausted whoever tries to catch up with you. So he's washing, giving ghusl to the body of his father, Imam Abu Hanifa, and he says, what have you done? You have done so much that anyone who tries to catch up with you now will be exhausted, will never catch you. Imam Abu Hanifa radiallahu ta'ala. You've exhausted anyone who tries to catch up with you. And he was scrupulously pious, extremely pious. These people, you must remember, weren't just scholars of exterior knowledge. Okay, he was a master of fiqh, but we don't know how pious he was. Imam Abu Hanifa was very pious. And for example, a person called Ibn Hubayra, he offered him to be the judge. He offered him the judgeship. And Imam Abu Hanifa refused, and he had him whipped. And like Imam Bukhari and Imam Shafi'i, they both say, Imam Abu Hanifa during Ramadan, he would make the completion of 60 Qur'ans in the month of Ramadan. We struggle to do 1 or 2. Imam Abu Hanifa would finish 60 Qur'ans in the month of Ramadan, 1 in the day, 1 in the night. And some say 61, 1 in the day, 1 in the night, 1 in Taraweeh. He would be the Imam of Taraweeh. Allah, 60. This is how pious these people were. You think, if he's doing that, how do they have time to do anything else? But these people, because they were so pious and so close to Allah Ta'ala, they had a lot of barakah in their time, a lot of blessing in their time, that they managed to do so much in such little time. Whereas we complain, not enough time. We don't do anything, but still not enough time. They did everything, and they still had time. This is what it's meant, barakah in time. This is why it said, near the Day of Judgment, that the time will go quickly. It means there will be no barakah in the time. Not that literally time, it's going quicker in the seconds, you know, some things happen to make time go quicker. No, it's just, it means the barakah in the time. So he would recite 60 Quran besides his teaching duties and other duties. And Ibrahim ibn Rustam, he mentions that four are people, there are only 4 people, he says, that I know, that recited the entire Quran in a single raka'ah. 1 raka'ah of prayer. He says there are 4 people who would recite the entire Quran in 1 unit of prayer. Sayyidina Uthman ibn Affan, radiallahu anhu, Khalifa al-Thalith, the 3rd Khalifa, Tamim al-Dari, Sa'id ibn Jubayr, and Abu Hanifa, radiallahu ta'ala. The entire Quran, al-Hamd wa nas, in 1 raka'ah of prayer. So imagine how long they were standing in Nafl or the other prayers to do this. How did they have time for other things? Barakah in their time. Imam Ibn Mubarak, Abdullah ibn Mubarak, he is another person who is Amir al-Mu'mineen fil Hadith. There are only 30 people that have ever had this title in this ummah. The leader of the believers in the field of Hadith. Abdullah ibn Mubarak. He says about Imam Abu Hanifa that Abu Hanifa for a long time he would pray all 5 prayers with a single ablution. Meaning there was no sleep in between. He wasn't sleeping in the day at all. So he's teaching, studying, learning, having the majlis where they discuss and debate the rulings of fiqh. And then it's narrated about Imam Abu Hanifa that for 40 years, for 30 years he fasted continuously, for 30 years. And for 40 years he offered the Fajr prayer with the wudu of the Isha prayer. For 40 years. What does that mean? How can you pray Fajr with the wudu of Isha? It means you don't sleep. So in the day, learning and teaching and debating and holding ilmi majalis, and then in the night, you stand in the worship of Allah Ta'ala. So very little time to do anything else. Imam Suyuti, radiallahu anhu, in his book, people have written whole books about Imam Abu Hanifa. Imam Suyuti is a Shafi'i Imam, a Mujtahid Shafi'i, Mujtahid Imam. But still, even being a Shafi'i, he is writing books about Imam Abu Hanifa. Like Ibn Hajar Haythami, he wrote a book, Khayratul Hisam. He was a Shafi'i, writing books about Imam Abu Hanifa. This shows the mutual love amongst the madahib, because these are secondary issues. We can differ in these things. And he relates in his book, Tabiyud al-Sahifa, that a certain visitor, he came to observe Imam Abu Hanifa, and he saw him all day in the mosque. So he comes to visit the Imam, all day he sees the Imam in the mosque, and he is teaching relentlessly. He is answering every question from both the scholars and the common people in the masjid. And he doesn't stop except to pray. And then, once he leaves the masjid, he goes home and he stands in prayer when people are asleep. And he hardly ever eats or sleeps. Even after doing this, yet he says, he was the most handsome and gracious of people. So no signs of tiredness. Again, the barakah in their lives, because of this closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He was the most handsome, he was the most gracious of people. And he was always alert, never tired, always alert. Day after day for a long time. And he says, in the end, I saw this for many days, and in the end, I just said, I became convinced that this was no ordinary matter. This was actually wilayah. He was a wali, he was a friend of Allah Ta'ala. For him to be able to do these things. And there is a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, and Sayyidina Salman al-Farisi was sitting amongst the Sahaba with the Prophet, and they were discussing, and the Prophet ﷺ pointed to Salman because he was from Faras. Imam Abu Hanifa was from Faras. He was Persian descent. So the Prophet ﷺ addressed Salman, and he said, even if the knowledge of the deen, even if religious matters were to reach the Pleiades, it's a star cluster, it's a cluster of stars, even if the knowledge of the deen was in a star cluster away from the dunya, a man from his race, meaning a Persian, would even get knowledge from there and bring it down to the people. A Persian. So he was referring to Salman al-Farisi, Imam Suyuti, and other hadith scholars. In fact, there is unanimous agreement, even though they are Shafi'i, they say this must refer to Imam Abu Hanifa. The Prophet ﷺ was talking about Imam Abu Hanifa. He said, even if knowledge reached Thurayya, this word Thurayya is used a lot in Islamic literature, even if knowledge reached Thurayya, the Pleiades, the seven sisters, it's a star cluster, a man from the Persians would actually go and bring the knowledge and bring it to the people. How knowledgeable he will be. Imam Shafi'i said, knowledge revolves around three men, Malik, Al-Layth, and Ibn Uyayna, Sufyan ibn Uyayna. And Imam Dhahabi commented, he said, rather no, not three people, it revolves around Al-Awza'i, Sufyan al-Thawri, Ma'mar, Imam Abu Hanifa, and Shu'bah, and the two Hammads, Hammad ibn Zayd and Hammad ibn Salam. So he said, no, Imam Shafi'i, he said three, no, Imam Abu Hanifa is certainly amongst those people, knowledge revolves around them. And see again, people like Sufyan al-Thawri. Sufyan al-Thawri in himself, he was a leading Imam, like Sufyan ibn Uyayna, like Abdullah ibn Mubarak, the people who were the contemporaries of Imam Abu Hanifa, but he surpassed them all. He praised Imam Abu Hanifa and he said, when we were in front of Imam Abu Hanifa, it was like we were small birds in front of a falcon. We were small birds and then he's like a falcon. And Sufyan stood up for him when Imam Abu Hanifa visited him. So Sufyan would stand for him and he said, this man holds a high rank in knowledge. And if I didn't stand up for his knowledge in the sciences, I would stand up for his age. If I didn't stand for his age, then I would stand for his God-wariness, his wara, his taqwa. Wara and taqwa are interchangeable. Wara. And if it were not for his God-wariness, his wara, then I would stand up for his fiqh, his jurisprudence. So I would stand for him because he is accomplished in every department, whether you talk about taqwa, whether you talk about his age, whether you talk about his fiqh. I would stand for this man. And Ibn al-Mubarak, he praised Imam Abu Hanifa and he called him the sign of Allah. Ayatun min ayatillah. He's a sign from amongst the signs of Allah. When they saw Imam Abu Hanifa, someone like Abdullah, not me and you. Again, when you and I praise somebody, these are empty words. But someone like Abdullah ibn Mubarak praising somebody, this means something. This man is a sign of Allah when they saw the great Imam. And Abdullah ibn Mubarak also, along with Sufyan al-Thawri, they said, Abu Hanifa was in his time the most knowledgeable person in the world. They exist at the same time, remember. Yeah, Sufyan knows Abdullah ibn Mubarak is there, Ibn Uyayna is there, even Imam Malik is there. But they say in this time, Abu Hanifa in his time was the most knowledgeable of all people in the world. Imam Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu. And Ibn Hajar also related that Imam Abdullah ibn Mubarak said that if Allah Ta'ala had not rescued me with Abu Hanifa and Sufyan al-Thawri, these two people, I would have been like the rest of the common people. Abdullah ibn Mubarak is saying this about Imam Abu Hanifa, that if it wasn't for him and Sufyan al-Thawri, I would have been like a normal person. And not just I would have been a common person, he said I would have been an innovator. I would have been away from Ahlul Sunnah if it weren't for Imam Abu Hanifa and Sufyan al-Thawri. So this is how great these people were. So, Imam al-A'zam, the greatest Imam, that's what he means. He's Siraj al-Ummah. And this again, the word Siraj al-Ummah, some scholars have said the Torah, the Old Testament, it has descriptions of a person that fits Imam Abu Hanifa. And in that he is described as a light. And from there we have some people, it's Siraj al-Ummah, the sun, the light of this nation, Siraj al-Ummah. And Imam al-A'zam, the greatest Imam. But he is better known. His name is, we said, not Rani ibn Thabit, better known as Abu Hanifa. And he was born in Kufa. Kufa is in modern-day Iraq. And a lot of the time it's narrated that he was born in the year 80 after Hijri. 80 years after the Hijrah. Okay? So only around, not even 70 years after the demise of the Prophet ﷺ. So very close in time to the Prophet ﷺ. But Mufti Sharif al-Haq Amjadi, Imam Zahid al-Kawthari, and other leading Hanafi Imams have said that he was actually, the true opinion is he was born in 70 after Hijri. Okay. Some say even earlier, 61 after Hijri. So that's Karbala time. And some say, Mufti Sharif al-Haq says in his Nuzhatul Qari that he was 70 after Hijri. The common opinion is 80, but it doesn't really matter when he was born, but there is a difference of opinion. It doesn't matter when these great people were born or when they passed away, but it's just good to know. So it's a city, the Kufa is a city in Iraq, and he was born into a family of tradespeople. And Kufa was a very early city, established by the Sahaba when they went in the Battle of Qadisiyah. After these battles, it was a garrison town. So he was established then. So he was born into a family of tradespeople. They were businessmen. And the Imam's family were of Persian origin. Faras. Like we mentioned in the hadith, if the ilm was in the Pleiades, in the Thuraya, a man from Persian descent. He was from Persian descent. And that's why the scholars say there hasn't been anyone else who has been Persian who fits the bill. It has to be him. The Prophet ﷺ was talking about him, radiyallahu anhu. So the Imam's family were Persian origin, and some say they descended from Salman al-Farisi, radiyallahu anhu. And Imam Abu Hanifa's father Thabit is mentioned. Either his father Thabit or his father, Imam Abu Hanifa's grandfather Hammad, had met Sayyidina Ali in Kufa. And they'd given him sweets, mitai or sweets, so a sweet dish they presented to Sayyidina Ali radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, because Sayyidina Ali had shifted the capital of the Islamic Empire to Kufa. Sayyidina Ali's capital is Kufa. And when we were there recently, we saw his headquarters and the home and everything else. So Kufa was the center of the Islamic world at the time and thereafter, of Islamic learning. Even in the time of Imam Bukhari, in the year 256 Hijri, when he passed away, Kufa was the center of Islamic learning. So imagine in the time of Imam Hanifa, how much learning was there, where the Sahaba were around. Yeah? And say 1500 Sahaba passed through Kufa, 1500. So Kufa was the center of learning. So they presented the sweet dish to Sayyidina Ali, and then he did dua. He did dua for them and their progeny. That Allah Ta'ala bless you and your children. And the scholars say that Imam Abu Hanifa is a result of this dua. Sayyidina Ali, obviously Sayyidina Ali doing dua for you is going to have an effect. And you will have, and that's why you have a son like Abu Hanifa. Some scholars say he was a result of this dua. And we've mentioned the hadith, if the religion were at the Pleiades, someone from the Faras would get it from there. So Kufa, at the time of the Imam's birth, was the center of knowledge and learning, and many of the companions had taken residence in Kufa. So it's very hard to imagine that Imam Abu Hanifa didn't see the Sahaba. The scholars have mentioned that he certainly did. Okay, but just for argument's sake, you know, if you're a Muslim and you're a Muslim scholar and people flock towards you and you know there's a Sahabi in town, wouldn't you go there? Even if, look, for us, for example, someone said to you, let's say you live in Manchester and someone like Sayyidi Ala is coming to your city, but you sit at home, you definitely flock to see this person. So it's very hard to imagine that Kufa, which had so many Sahaba coming there at the time of Abu Hanifa, and he wouldn't go to see them. Doesn't make sense, doesn't add up. So due to the presence of all these venerable people, there was a lot of interest in Kufa at the time, in hadith and riwayah. And in every house in Kufa, practically every house in Kufa, it was a center of disciples and learning. At first, to begin with, the Imam wasn't a student of knowledge. Okay, we said his family were tradespeople, and he was a businessman who traded in silk, in clothing. Okay, so that was his business, and it was a very huge business where he would, you know, hundreds of thousands of dirhams, tens of thousands of dirhams he would exchange daily. It was a big business for him. However, by coincidence, so one day, Imam Sha'bi, he passed by Imam Abu Hanifa. He passed him by, maybe he was at the shop, or maybe he saw him on the street. He was a great scholar. Imam Sha'bi was a great scholar from amongst the Tabi'in. And he saw Imam Abu Hanifa, and obviously these people have insight. Okay, they have what we call the firasa. Okay, the spiritual eyes. And the Shaykh, Imam Sha'bi, called Imam Abu Hanifa, and he mistook him for a student. He thought he's a student. He thought Abu Hanifa is a student. And so Imam Abu Hanifa is walking along. So where are you going? Imam Abu Hanifa said, I'm going to see such and such a merchant about my business. So Imam Sha'bi thought he was going to a madrasa. And he said, I meant to ask, Imam Sha'bi said, I'm meaning to ask you, whose class do you attend? Imam Sahib said, nobody's, regretfully. He was regretfully saying, nobody, I don't attend anybody's, I'm not a student of knowledge. Imam Sha'bi said, but I see the signs of intelligence in you. You should sit in the company of learned men. You should sit in their company. And Imam Abu Hanifa says, my world was revolutionized by this. So we owe a lot to Imam Sha'bi as well. Imagine he hadn't said that and this didn't happen. You know, this chance meeting, that you should study. I see this sign of intelligence in you. After this encounter, the Imam began his quest for knowledge. Imam Abu Hanifa, he acquired knowledge, it's mentioned, from 4,000 teachers. 4,000 shuyukh he has. And the most prestigious men of the time, and whose sanad, whose chain of transmission went all the way back to the Prophet ﷺ. And he, like we mentioned, he met some of the Sahaba, Anas ibn Malik, Abdullah ibn Abi Awfa, Sahih ibn Sa'ad, and so he was a Tabi'i, like we mentioned. But his major shaykh, who he spent at least 18 years with, was Imam Hammad ibn Sulaiman. Imam Abu Hanifa was 22 years old. Yeah, at the age of 22, he wasn't a student of knowledge. So if someone here is thinking, I'm 25, I'm 30, I'm 35, 40, how can I study? Someone like Abu Hanifa was 22 and he wasn't a student by then. Do you understand? So this is for us, it's for me and for you to think, if Imam Abu Hanifa comes, you know, he wasn't a student from an early age. Like we talk about Al-Azhar, qualified Mufti at 13. It wasn't always the case. Someone far, far greater than Al-Azhar, Abu Hanifa, wasn't a student till he was 22. So why is it too late for me and you? It's never too late. So he was 22, he joined his circle at the age of 22, Imam Hammad. And Imam Abu Hanifa studied with his shaykh till the shaykh's demise. And after the shaykh's demise, because he was such a leading scholar, people talked about who should replace him, and Imam Abu Hanifa was chosen to take over the majlis at the age of 40. So from the age of 22 to the age of 40, 18 years, he studied with his teacher, and then he took over this majlis of Imam Hammad. And he had other great teachers like Shu'bah, and they were greatly attached to the Imam. His teachers were greatly attached to him. And they would say, so a teacher saying about the student, just as I know that the sun is bright, I know that learning and Abu Hanifa are doubles of each other. So just as we can not deny that the sun is bright, You cannot deny Abu Hanifa and learning, they are just doubles of one another. They go together. And the Imam's quest for knowledge took him to various different places, and it said that he performed 55 Hajj. 55 times the Imam visited the holy sanctuaries, Haramain Sharifain. And again, Mecca was also obviously a center of learning. A lot of hadith masters were in Mecca, and who had access to who had seen the Prophet ﷺ and his Sahaba, and they had their own schools there. So Imam Abu Hanifa travelled to seek hadith. Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Umar, he had students there who were teaching as well. And his students were so learned, like Ata ibn Rabah, that Abdullah ibn Umar himself used to say, why do people come to me when they have Ata ibn Rabah? Abdullah ibn Umar is saying this about Ata ibn Rabah. And he was one of the teachers of Imam Abu Hanifa. Imam Abu Hanifa also attended the lessons of Ikrimah, who was a star student of Imam Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Abbas, Hibrul Ummah. Abdullah, the cousin of the Prophet ﷺ, is Ikrimah, and the Imam took knowledge from Ikrimah. So that's how close he was to the Sahaba in terms of the sanad. This same Ikrimah, during his lifetime, actually he saw the proficiency of the Imam, and he gave him full ijazah to deliver religious verdicts during his lifetime. Not saying after I go, then you can take over. No, in my lifetime, if you seek judicial verdicts, go to Abu Hanifa. Ikrimah is saying this. And many well-known shuyukh have narrated from Imam Abu Hanifa, like Sufyan al-Thawri, Abdullah ibn Mubarak, Hamad ibn Zayd, Imam Abdul Razak. See, Imam Abu Hanifa came way before Imam Bukhari. Imam Abdul Razak is from the grand teachers of Imam Bukhari, whereas he is a student of Abu Hanifa. Okay. Even the other hadith masters, like all the mujtahid imams like Imam Shafi'i, he is a student of Imam Muhammad Shaybani, who is a student of Abu Hanifa. So the other mujtahid imams are the students of Abu Hanifa. Imam Malik is a student, and then we have their students of each other, like Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, Imam Malik, Imam Shafi'i. They're students of one another. And then when you go above them a few generations, then you come to Imam Abu Hanifa. So this is how high up Imam Abu Hanifa was in terms of this sanad. And we've already mentioned Imam Shafi'i saying, all men of fiqh are Abu Hanifa's children. And Imam Shafi'i said, I would have acquired anything of knowledge had it not been for my teacher, Muhammad Shaybani, who is a student of Imam Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu. The Hanafi madhab, like we know, it spread far and wide during the time of the Ottoman Empire, and like we said, 70% or so of the dunya now follow the Hanafi school, and it's even been the government madhab. So the Mughals, the Ottomans, it was the law of the land, the Hanafi madhab. Okay, we've probably got 7 minutes till the adhan. And this is nowhere long enough to talk about the Imam. There's so much to cover of his life. But this is just to give a brief synopsis, a brief introduction to the Imam. So Abu Hanifa, where does this come from? The scholars mention a few reasons for this. Hanifa is the feminine of Hanif. Okay, it is the ta'neef of Hanif, which means someone who performs a lot of worship, someone who does a lot of ibadah. And someone who is very attached to the deen. So this is Hanif, someone who does a lot of worship or attached to the deen. And the feminine for this is Hanifa. So that's why, because he was very attached to worship, someone who worshipped Allah Ta'ala a lot, he is Abu Hanifa. Or because his gathering was vast, it's mentioned that for every mas'ala, he would be there, and there would be 1,000 students, 40 of them would be mujtahids themselves. 40 of them were at the level of ijtihad, where they can exercise derivation of laws directly from the Quran and Sunnah themselves. 40 of them amongst the 1,000 students were mujtahids themselves. And imagine Abu Hanifa is sitting there as the teacher, 40 are mujtahids, 1,000 students, they would debate the issue. So the gathering was vast. So because the gathering was vast, and his students would bring writing instruments and paper with them. And for the Iraqis, the pen and the inkpot, they refer to this as Hanifa. They call this Hanifa. So because all the students who would bring something to write with and something to write on, this is called Hanifa. So this is why he is called Abu Hanifa. Okay. Not that he had a daughter called Hanifa. He only had one son, Hamad. He didn't have any daughter. Allah says he had no daughter called Hanifa. These are the reasons he is called Imam Abu Hanifa. So I've already mentioned at this point that Mufti Sharifullah Amjadi prefers 70 after Hijri for his birth. 70 to 150 after Hijri. And it's also interesting that Imam Abu Hanifa passed away in the year 150 Hijri, and that's when Imam Shafi'i was born. Because these dates also play quite an important role, and they're quite important. Like one mujtahid lives dunya, so Allah Ta'ala sent another mujtahid. Like Data Sahib. You all know Data Sahib, when he came to Lahore and they said, you need to go to Lahore. And he said, why should I go to Lahore when such and such a great wali is there? And he said, you must go. And the day he arrives in Lahore, he sees a big janazah. Who is this? It is that certain wali. Allah Ta'ala had sent him because Allah Ta'ala knew this wali is about to depart, and Data Sahib is to replace him. So Imam Abu Hanifa passed on, and Sayyidina Imam Shafi'i is born to carry on his legacy. But the year of birth is 70 after Hijri. Some of the Imam's habits, so this is the last point, inshallah. Imam Abu Hanifa was of medium height, so moderate medium height, very beautiful, very handsome, very well spoken. He was very well spoken, and Abu Nu'aym, he narrates that Imam Abu Hanifa, he was very beautiful, and his clothing was always good, so he dressed well, and he would always apply the itr and the perfumes. He smelled very nice. Okay, always, and his gathering was also very good. So his clothing and his handsomeness and the smell and the gathering, everything about him was good. And he would be especially kind to the poor people. He was very generous to them. It said that he would make profits, vast profits, and as soon as he had made enough that suffices, the rest he would give away as sadaqah. He would give it away, and wouldn't charge extortionate fees, extortionate profits. So once a lady comes and she decides to buy a cloth from the Imam, and she's selling it, and she says, you can have this for such and such an amount. Imam says, no, it's worth more than that. She said, you're not having a laugh, are you? You're buying this off me, you should be reducing the price. If the Imam says, no, it's worth 100. She says 100. He says, no, I think it's 200. 200 goes to 3, goes to 4. She says, you're definitely having a laugh now, you're messing about with me. As a buyer, why do you want to increase the price? And then someone passes by and he checks the cloth. This is worth, she didn't know. She didn't know this is a very good cloth. Someone passes by and says, this is worth 500. So the Imam gives her 500 dirhams. Okay, in another time, a lady comes and he sells her the cloth for 4 dirhams only. She says, why are you selling it so cheap? 4 dirhams. The Imam says, look, I bought 2. The first one I've sold, and I only need to make 4 more dirhams to make the profit that I wanted to make. So I'll give you this a lot cheaper. The last incident, which shows the taqwa of the Imam, once in Kufa, it was the news spread that a goat has been stolen. Someone has stolen a goat. So what does the Imam go and do? The Imam finds out what the average age of a goat is, how long do they live, and it was said to him about 7 years they live. Maximum they live for 7 years. For 7 years, the Imam didn't eat goat meat. Because the goat was stolen, maybe the goat I'm eating is that goat. The Imam didn't eat, for 7 years didn't eat that meat. So now he knows that goat, 7 years is the age of goats, he must be dead, then he starts to eat the meat of goat. So this is how close these people were to Allah. We're very fortunate to be the muqallids of such an Imam. And inshallah, we can do more lessons on Taqleed and the Imam in future as well, inshallah.